Child, stop scrolling for just a moment, because something has shifted in the unseen places of the heart, and what you are about to hear was meant to reach you before you misunderstood the silence surrounding this connection. There is a reason you have felt an unusual distance lately, a reason certain thoughts have returned when you believed you had finally quieted them, and a reason the person connected to your heart has seemed to move closer emotionally while somehow becoming harder to see. Do not mistake that contradiction for emptiness. Something has been happening beneath the surface. A truth they believed they could keep hidden has finally begun to rise, and strangely, now that it is coming into the light, their first instinct is not to run toward you. It is to hide from your eyes. Not because you mean nothing to them, but because being seen by you now feels more powerful than they expected. There is something they are afraid your eyes will recognize before their words are ready to confess it. Pause here, beloved, because this is where the story becomes deeper than appearances. There are moments when people hide because they are dishonest, but there are also moments when people hide because the truth has become too honest. Your soulmate has been carrying something inside that has changed the way they think about you, the way they think about themselves, and perhaps even the way they understand what has happened between you. They thought they had more time. They thought they could organize their emotions privately, find the right explanation, become calm enough to stand in front of you without revealing everything. But something happened that disturbed that plan. Something forced a realization into the open, and now the truth is no longer sitting quietly in the back of their mind. It is following them into ordinary moments. It is appearing when they wake up, when the room becomes quiet, when someone says something that reminds them of you, and when they imagine what would happen if you suddenly stood before them and asked one simple question: what have you really been feeling? That question frightens them more than they want to admit, because deep inside, they know they would struggle to answer it without exposing everything. They may have rehearsed calm conversations in their mind. They may have imagined acting unaffected. They may have promised themselves that if they ever saw you again, they would appear composed, confident, and completely in control. But heaven sees the difference between what a person rehearses and what their heart actually does. Their heart is not calm when it comes to you. Their heart remembers. Their heart compares. Their heart notices your absence in places where they assumed they would eventually stop noticing it. And now they are facing a realization they cannot easily dismiss. They may have hidden the truth from you, but they have not been able to hide it from themselves. Something is waiting for you inside this message, and you must hear it carefully. Their desire to avoid being seen is connected to vulnerability, not simply rejection. They know there are things written across their face that words could never disguise. They know that if you looked at them long enough, you might notice the hesitation, the softness, the regret, perhaps even the relief of finally being near someone they have been trying not to think about. There is a strange fear that comes when a person realizes the one they tried hardest to hide from may also be the one who understands them fastest. Your soulmate senses that about you. Whether they have admitted it openly or not, they believe you notice more than they say. They believe you can feel when something is different. And because the truth has become stronger, they are afraid you will recognize it before they are ready to speak. For a while, they convinced themselves that silence was protection. If they stayed quiet, nothing would have to change. If they kept their distance, nobody would have to face uncomfortable questions. If they distracted themselves with responsibilities, conversations, plans, and the ordinary noise of life, perhaps this connection would eventually soften into something manageable. But there are emotions that become smaller when ignored, and there are emotions that become clearer. This one became clearer. Every attempt to push it aside showed them something they had not wanted to see. They began realizing that the issue was not simply missing you. It was what missing you revealed about them. And that is the part they do not want you to see yet. They do not want you to see how deeply certain choices affected them. They do not want you to see that they have questioned themselves. They do not want you to know how many times they replayed conversations differently in their mind, imagining what they should have said, what they should have asked, what they should have admitted. Perhaps there was a moment when pride spoke louder than affection. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding they allowed to grow because explaining themselves felt too vulnerable. Perhaps timing became an excuse. Perhaps fear disguised itself as logic. Whatever form it took, they are beginning to understand that something they once called necessary may actually have been avoidance. And avoidance always has a cost. At first the cost seemed small. A message left unwritten. A feeling left unexplained. A moment allowed to pass. But later, the silence became heavier because every passing day added another question: what if they think I never cared? That question has begun to trouble them. They are not only thinking about what they feel. They are thinking about what you might believe about their feelings. They wonder whether you interpreted their quietness as indifference. They wonder whether you finally stopped waiting for clarity. They wonder whether you have begun seeing them differently. And the possibility that you may have emotionally moved somewhere they cannot easily reach has awakened something urgent inside them. Yet here is the contradiction: the more urgent the feeling becomes, the more exposed they feel. This is why they may not want you to see them right now. Not because they want you gone, but because they are afraid they will not be able to maintain the version of themselves they have shown the world. They have built an emotional wall with carefully chosen bricks: composure, distraction, busyness, silence, perhaps even humor or indifference. But your presence threatens that wall because you carry memories that existed before the wall was complete. You remind them of the version of themselves that felt without strategy. You remind them of words they almost said. You remind them of a connection they may have tried to categorize, explain away, or postpone. And lately, postponement has stopped feeling safe. There was a moment, beloved, when something changed. It may have looked ordinary from the outside. Perhaps they heard something about you. Perhaps someone mentioned your name unexpectedly. Perhaps they saw something that reminded them of where you once stood emotionally in their life. Perhaps they experienced disappointment somewhere else and suddenly understood the value of what they had overlooked. Perhaps nothing dramatic happened at all. Perhaps they simply sat alone long enough for the truth to catch up with them. But whatever opened that door, something entered their awareness that they could not push back out. They realized they still care. But the revelation did not stop there. They realized that caring is not the deepest part. They realized they have been measuring other emotions against what they felt around you. They noticed that certain conversations do not reach them the same way. Certain connections do not create the same sense of being understood. Certain people can stand close and still feel far away, while the memory of you can cross distance without permission. This realization unsettled them, because it means what they were trying to forget has become a standard their heart uses without asking. That is not easy to admit. Imagine, beloved, what it feels like to spend so long convincing yourself that a door is closed, only to discover you have been standing beside it with your hands still resting on the handle. That is where their heart is now. They are looking at themselves differently. They are asking whether the story they told themselves was actually true. Were they really over it? Were they really unaffected? Did they really stop wondering about you? Or did they simply become skilled at functioning while the questions remained? Heaven does not reveal this to make you chase anyone. Hear that clearly. You are not being asked to prove your worth, force a conversation, or abandon your peace in search of answers. What belongs in your life must meet you with honesty, not endless confusion. This message is not permission to lose yourself inside another person's hesitation. It is an invitation to understand that silence is not always the whole story, and that what people display outwardly may be only one layer of what they are experiencing inwardly. Because the deeper truth is this: they are becoming aware of something about you that they had taken for granted. Your presence affected them more than they admitted. There was something about the way you cared, the way you listened, the way you remained in certain moments when others might have left, or perhaps simply the way you made them feel emotionally visible. At the time, they may not have understood the rarity of that experience. Human hearts sometimes recognize value only after distance creates comparison. What once felt familiar suddenly becomes precious when it is absent. And lately, your soulmate has been comparing. They remember small things. Not merely dramatic moments, but details they never expected to survive in memory. A particular expression. A certain way you responded when they were uncertain. Something you said casually that now seems strangely meaningful. A moment when they felt you understood more than they explained. They may even remember a disagreement differently now. Time has removed some of the heat and exposed what was underneath. Beneath frustration there may have been fear. Beneath silence there may have been attachment. Beneath distance there may have been two people protecting themselves in ways that accidentally created more distance. And now one of them is finally seeing it. But why would that make them avoid your eyes? Because regret has a face. When someone realizes they might have mishandled something meaningful, they often become uncomfortable around the person who symbolizes that realization. Your eyes become a mirror. Your presence asks questions without speaking. They fear you will see that they know. They fear you will recognize the moment their confidence breaks. They fear you will notice that whatever story they once told you about being fine, being certain, being finished, or being unaffected may no longer match what is happening inside them. There is another layer, however, and this is where you must stay close to the message. They are not only afraid you will see regret. They are afraid you will see hope. That is what they have been hiding most carefully. Regret can be explained away. People can say, "I wish I handled things differently," and still remain emotionally protected. But hope is dangerous to a guarded heart because hope admits there is still something desired. Hope reveals that some part of them still wonders what might happen if honesty replaced distance. Some part of them imagines a conversation going differently. Some part wonders whether the chapter they assumed was finished might not have reached its true ending. And they do not know whether you feel anything similar. That uncertainty is shaking them. They have tried to read clues from a distance. They may wonder what your silence means. They may question whether your strength is proof that you have forgotten them or simply proof that you have learned to protect your heart. They may think about reaching out and then stop themselves because they cannot predict your reaction. Their mind creates possibilities. What if you ignore them? What if you are kind but emotionally finished? What if you ask the questions they have been avoiding? What if you see through them immediately? But another possibility has begun haunting them even more. What if you still care? That thought should make approaching you easier, but strangely it makes everything more intense. Because if you still care, then honesty has consequences. They can no longer hide behind the assumption that nothing could change. They would have to decide what they truly want. They would have to take responsibility for words, choices, distance, timing, and perhaps wounds that were never properly acknowledged. This is why the truth finally coming out does not immediately create movement. Sometimes revelation first creates stillness. A person stands frozen because the lie they told themselves is gone, but they have not yet learned how to live inside the truth. Your soulmate is standing somewhere near that emotional threshold. They know more today than they allowed themselves to know before. And someone may have contributed to this realization. Yes, beloved, another voice may have entered the story. Not necessarily a romantic rival, not necessarily someone trying to interfere, but someone who saw something your soulmate believed was invisible. It could have been a friend, a relative, a colleague, or simply someone whose honesty arrived at exactly the wrong, or perhaps exactly the right, moment. A question may have been asked. A comment may have landed too close to the truth. Someone may have noticed the change in their expression when your name appeared, or noticed how quickly they became defensive when the subject turned toward you. They may have denied it. But denial did not erase what was exposed. Imagine someone saying, perhaps in a casual tone, if you truly don't care, why does this still affect you? That kind of question can follow a person home. And something like that has been following your soulmate. They began examining their reactions instead of their explanations. Their explanations said they had moved on emotionally. Their reactions told another story. Their explanations said the past was settled. Their reactions became unsettled whenever you were mentioned. Their explanations said distance was for the best. Their reactions asked why distance still hurt. That contradiction finally became impossible to ignore. And when they could no longer ignore it, something inside them cracked open. Not dramatically. Not in the way movies show it. Sometimes the deepest emotional breakthroughs happen quietly. A person sits alone, staring at nothing, when suddenly every excuse they have been carrying loses its power. There is no audience. No music. No great speech. Just a terrifyingly simple realization, I still feel this. Your soulmate had a moment like that. And after it came another thought. I may have waited too long. That thought carries weight. They began wondering what has changed in your world. They imagined you becoming emotionally stronger without them. They imagined another person someday recognizing what they hesitated to recognize. They imagined your laughter existing in rooms they would never enter. They imagined you no longer looking at your phone with even the smallest hope that their name might appear. And for the first time, losing access to you felt real. Not theoretical. Real. That is when the hidden truth became impossible to contain. But here is where heaven asks you to remain grounded. Another person's realization is not your command to wait indefinitely. Their awakening does not cancel your boundaries. Their feelings do not automatically guarantee compatibility, timing, maturity, or action. Love must eventually become more than emotion if it is meant to build anything lasting. It must become courage, responsibility, communication, respect, consistency. Your soulmate is beginning to understand this too. They are realizing that feeling deeply while doing nothing creates its own kind of loss. And that realization is pushing them toward a choice. But before that choice comes, they are confronting another secret, one even more difficult than the truth of their feelings. It has something to do with why they pulled away in the first place. For a long time, you may have believed their distance was about you. Perhaps you questioned whether you were too much, not enough, too open, too quiet, too trusting, too guarded. Perhaps you replayed yourself in your mind, wondering which version of you might have made them stay closer. But beloved, another person's emotional fear often makes us question qualities that were never the true problem. The hidden issue was not necessarily that you lacked something. It may have been that your presence awakened something they did not know how to manage. Around you, they felt seen. And being seen is beautiful only when a person is ready to face what the mirror reveals. Your soulmate had parts of themselves they preferred not to examine. Old disappointments. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of committing to something they could not control. Fear of needing someone emotionally. Fear of being responsible for another person's heart. Perhaps even fear that if they allowed themselves to love completely, they would eventually experience the kind of loss they had spent years learning to avoid. So when the connection became emotionally real, they did something humans sometimes do when frightened by something precious. They created distance from the very thing they wanted. Not because they consciously planned to hurt you. Not because every choice was justified. But because fear can imitate certainty. It tells someone, leave before you are left. Stay silent before you are rejected. Pretend you don't care before anyone discovers how much you do. For a while, they listened. Now they are seeing the cost. This is why the truth coming out feels so overwhelming. It is not one confession. It is several realizations arriving together. They still care. They may regret the distance. They are afraid you have changed. They are afraid you have not changed. They are afraid you can see what they feel. They are afraid you may no longer want to. And beneath all those fears is a question they have not yet answered. Do I have the courage to become honest now? That question has become the center of their inner world. You may sense unusual energy around this connection because decisions create pressure before they create movement. Think of the sky just before rain. Nothing has fallen yet, but the atmosphere has changed. You can feel something gathering. In the same way, your soulmate is approaching a moment where remaining silent may become harder than speaking. They have imagined telling you something. Not everything at once. Just enough to open the door. They have imagined a simple message. A small question. A reason to contact you that appears ordinary on the surface while carrying an entirely different meaning underneath. They have rehearsed how you might respond. They have imagined reading your words again and again, searching for warmth, distance, hesitation, anything that tells them whether the emotional bridge still exists. But each time they imagine pressing send, another fear rises. Because once they reach toward you, they cannot fully pretend anymore. Their action would reveal intention. And intention is the part they have hidden from everyone. Perhaps even from the person who confronted them. There may be someone around them who already suspects that this is not finished emotionally. Someone has noticed that whenever your name or the idea of reconnecting appears, your soulmate becomes strangely thoughtful. They might change the subject. They might become quiet. They might insist there is nothing there. But the stronger the denial, the more obvious the emotion sometimes becomes. And recently, something was said that they cannot forget. A person close to them may have asked whether pride is worth losing someone meaningful. That question reached a place nothing else reached. Because your soulmate knows pride has played a role. Not necessarily arrogance. Pride often appears as emotional self-protection. It says, I will not be the first one to admit I miss them. I will not reveal that I was hurt. I will not let them know they still matter. But beneath those statements is fear. Your soulmate is becoming exhausted from carrying that fear. Something in them wants freedom. Freedom from pretending. Freedom from rehearsing conversations that never happen. Freedom from wondering what you would say. Freedom from looking away from the truth every time it appears. And this, beloved, is why they do not want you to see them right now. Because they are not confident they can continue pretending in front of you. If you appeared unexpectedly, their carefully protected emotions might betray them in seconds. Their eyes might soften. Their voice might change. They might say less because saying more would become dangerous. They might look away because looking directly at you would bring every hidden feeling too close to the surface. They know this. They have imagined it. And somewhere deep down, perhaps they secretly want that moment despite being afraid of it. There is something strangely human about wanting to be discovered while simultaneously hiding. That is where they are. They want you to know, but they are afraid to tell you. They want you to understand, but they fear what understanding will require. They want another chance at honesty, but they do not know whether another chance exists. And then something happened very recently that intensified everything. Something they learned, saw, heard, or realized changed the urgency of this entire situation. It involved you. And whatever it was, it made them question an assumption they had been depending on. They had assumed there would always be more time. More time to speak. More time to explain. More time to become ready. More time to decide what they wanted. But suddenly, time no longer feels endless. They became aware that your life is moving, whether they participate in it or not. You are changing. You are healing. You are learning. You may be becoming less available to uncertainty. And that realization frightened them in a way they did not expect. Because somewhere inside, they had quietly believed the connection would remain waiting in the exact emotional position where they left it. But hearts are not furniture. They grow. They protect themselves. They become wiser. They eventually stop standing at doors that never open. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that your heart may not wait forever for words they were too frightened to speak. This is creating urgency. Yet urgency alone is not the biggest revelation. The biggest revelation is what they finally admitted about why seeing you feels unbearable right now. They are not merely afraid you will discover they still care. They are afraid you will discover how much. There is a difference. Still caring can sound small. Nostalgic. Manageable. But what they are experiencing is becoming harder to describe with small language. They may have tried calling it curiosity. It was more than curiosity. They may have called it regret. It was more than regret. They may have told themselves they simply wondered how you were doing. But they do not wonder about everyone this way. They do not replay everyone. They do not imagine conversations with everyone. They do not fear being seen by everyone. The intensity itself has become evidence. And evidence demands an answer. Now another layer is opening, beloved. There is something your soulmate has not told anyone completely. Someone may know pieces. Someone may suspect. But there is one part they have kept entirely private. It is connected to a specific moment involving you, a moment they return to mentally far more often than you would imagine. Maybe you barely remember it. Maybe to you it was small. But to them it became a turning point. In that moment, they understood something about your heart. And instead of moving closer, they panicked. They saw sincerity. They saw possibility. They saw a future they could not emotionally control. And because they were not ready to trust something that powerful, they backed away from it. Now they are looking back and realizing that the moment they thought they were protecting themselves may have been the moment they began losing something they genuinely wanted. That realization has brought them to the edge of honesty. But there is one final truth beneath everything I have shown you so far. It is the truth that explains their silence, their distance, their fear of your eyes, and the strange urgency building around this connection. Your soulmate has recently made a decision. They have not acted on it yet. They may not have told anyone. But internally, something has changed from maybe someday to I cannot keep doing this. They know pretending has reached its limit. They know a conversation must eventually happen, even if the answer they receive is not the answer they hope for. They would rather face truth than remain trapped inside endless possibilities. And yet, before they speak, they are trying to discover one thing. One sign. One small indication that approaching you would not reopen everything only to end in silence again. They are watching more carefully than you realize. Not necessarily watching you literally, but watching for meaning. Remembering your last words. Interpreting old moments. Wondering whether your emotional door is completely closed or merely guarded. And there is something they believe they noticed. Something about you that gave them hope. Whether they interpreted it correctly is another question. But it was enough to make them consider doing what they have resisted for far too long. Beloved, do not rush ahead of the story. Do not force meaning onto every coincidence. Remain centered. Your worth does not depend on what they decide next. The most important truth is not that another person finally recognizes your value. Your value existed before their realization. But their realization is real within this story. And it is approaching a moment of consequence. Because the decision they made was not simply to admit their feelings to themselves. It was something far more vulnerable. They decided that if one particular thing happens, they will finally tell you the truth. Not half the truth. Not the safe version. Not the carefully edited explanation. The truth about why they disappeared emotionally. The truth about what they felt after the distance began. The truth about the moment they almost came back. And the truth about something they did in secret that involved you, something you were never supposed to know. That is the part that made them afraid for you to see them. Because if you knew what they did, you would understand instantly that their feelings never disappeared the way they pretended they had. And tonight, they are closer than ever to revealing it. But before that happens, there is one detail heaven has not yet uncovered for you. A detail involving the night they realized they might have lost you for good. What happened during that night changed everything. They made a choice they have never admitted. And once you learn what that choice was, you will finally understand why they can no longer look at you and pretend nothing is there.